and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israeli airstrikes killed at least 58 people across Gaza as tanks pushed into suburbs amid one of the heaviest bombardments in weeks, according to reports. Meanwhile, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is headed to Washington for ceasefire talks with the Trump administration. Russia has summoned Azerbaijan's envoy over the detention of journalists and cancelled events, calling the moves unfriendly, according to RIA. Meanwhile, Russian media claims troops took a village in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, with no confirmation from Kyiv. EU strikes a long-term trade deal with Ukraine on farm imports, aiming to secure trade floors while protecting EU farmers' interests, according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The Mediterranean Sea has hit a record high average temperature for June, according to France's National Weather Service. The agency has also warned warming waters could fuel extreme weather and harm marine life. More than 50,000 people have been evacuated as wildfires rage across Turkey, mostly in the western Izmir province, according to the country's disaster agency. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has said that Israel is interested in peace agreements with Syria and Lebanon, citing new regional dynamics after the Iran-Israel ceasefire and the weakening of Hezbollah, according to media reports. Palestine Action in United Kingdom has filed a legal challenge against the UK government's move to ban the group under anti-terror laws, according to media reports. Meanwhile, London's High Court has upheld the UK's decision to export F-35 parts to Israel. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadepool arrived in Kyiv now to reaffirm support for Ukraine with more air defenses and aid, as Zelensky urged the West to respond after a major Russian strike, according to media reports. Iran has criticized President Donald Trump for his inconsistent position on lifting economic sanctions against Tehran. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Bagheri accused Trump of playing games with his shifting stance. Bagheri said Trump's statements do not aim to resolve the conflicts between the two nations. He called these comments psychological and media tactics rather than genuine dialogue. Bagheri told reporters at a press conference to see Trump's words as political maneuvers. He emphasized that Iran views the shifting stance as a lack of serious commitment. The spokesperson insisted that Iran seeks real solutions, not confusing mixed messages. Bagheri warned that Trump's approach could undermine trust between the countries. He urged the international community to recognize these statements as strategic posturing. Iran remains cautious and calls for honest negotiations to address the issues. We have guests joining us. John Rosomondo, he's president of Viking Research Associates, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, John, for joining us today. Good to see you. Iran has now accused Trump of playing games with sanctions, but does Tehran have any proof the U.S. ever made a clear, consistent offer to lift them?
Well, President Trump's offer was contingent on Tehran giving up its enrichment program, which it repeatedly said it wouldn't do, which was Trump's red line, which was why he and Netanyahu went ahead with the strikes against Iran. The Iranians have shown no interest in giving up their military program.
And according to you, is Trump's inconsistent position part of a deliberate, maybe maximum pressure strategy, according to him, or does it actually weaken America's leverage in this situation?
Well, everything Trump does is political, and so everything is about getting psychological advantage over his partner, over his adversary. It's something He did when he was in business. He writes about it in his 1987 book, The Art of the Deal. He does it in domestic policy, and he also does it on the international stage. He doesn't want the other side to know what he's doing, which adds to their psychological pressure.
Thank you very much, John. You will stay with us. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian told French President Emmanuel Macron that Tehran stopped cooperating with the UN nuclear watchdog because the agency's chief acted destructively towards Iran. Pezeshkian said in a phone call that Iranian parliament members responded naturally to what they see as the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General's unjustified and harmful behavior. Recently, Iranian lawmakers passed a bill suspending cooperation with the IAEA, pointing to Israel's June 13th attack and subsequent U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Although a ceasefire between Iran and Israel began on June 24th, Iranian officials sharply criticized the IAEA for not condemning those attacks. Iran also condemned the agency for adopting a resolution on June 12, accusing Tehran of violating nuclear obligations. Yesterday, Macron called for respect of the ceasefire and urged a return to talks on ballistic and nuclear issues. He also pushed the IAEA to quickly resume its work in Iran to ensure full transparency. Now today, France, Germany, and Britain have condemned what they described as threats against IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi after Iran rejected his request to inspect nuclear sites damaged in the conflict. While they did not specify the threats, Iran's conservative Kayhan newspaper recently accused Grossi of being an Israeli spy and demanded his execution. Iran claimed Grossi's inspection requests showed malign intent, but denied threatening him or the agency's inspectors. Now we are going back to our discussion with John Rosomondo. Thank you, John, for staying with us. Now, what is your reaction towards Iran rejecting IAEA's further inspection, and what are the risks with this rejection, according to you?
Well, from what I can see, it's more further evidence that Iran has a lot to hide. Its lack of transparency, if all it's doing is developing peaceful nuclear power, why does it need to hide from the IAEA? I mean, we've been dealing with things before, such as Iran removing cameras from IAEA, mandated inspection sites. The Iranians are upset that the IAEA ruled it out of compliance with the JCPOA, which was the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and other agreements that Iran has made. So it's hardly surprising to see that Iran, is doing this.
And according to you, what do you think that Iranian people's anger or shift towards IAEA is like? It seems like they don't trust IAEA anymore, and they have called that they have been betrayed by being transparent to IAEA. How would this Iranian people's point of view maybe lead to future Iranian decisions?
Well, I would say it's the Iranian government's perspective. The Iranian people, by and large, don't like this regime, but they can't do anything about it. But I would say that it just shows that they realize that they can't manipulate the IAEA and get it to do what it wants and to be biased toward Iran.
Thank you, John. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Iranian authorities reported today that Israeli attacks killed at least 935 people during a 12-day conflict. Among the fatalities, Judiciary spokesman Asghar Jahangir said 132 people were women and 38 were children, according to the semi-official Tasnim news agency. The Iranian Health Ministry had earlier reported 606 deaths and over 5,300 injuries from the strikes. Jahangir said Israeli airstrikes on Evin prison in northwest Tehran claimed 79 lives, including prisoners, staffs, and local residents. He added that the prison was rendered inoperable and authorities evacuated the prisoners, condemning the attack as a blatant violation of human rights and international law. The conflict erupted on June 13th when Israel launched airstrikes targeting Iranian military, nuclear, and civilian sites. The United States escalated the fighting with bombs on Iran's Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites. In response, Tehran fired missiles and drones at Israel, killing at least 29 people and injuring more than 3,400, according to data from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The violence ended with a U.S.-sponsored ceasefire that took effect on June 24th. Now we go back to our discussion on this with John Rosomondo. He's the president of Viking Research Associates. Thank you, John, for staying with us. Now, what are the risks that were involved in U.S. attack and Israel attacking nuclear facilities deep inside of Iran?
Well, I think the risk is that the Iranians had too much time to remove uranium and other materials from these sites before they were attacked. So the risk is that the uranium is still on the loose, and as somebody from NewsX, where I write sometimes, said, it's kind of like, where's Waldo? Where's the uranium? So that's something that, the Mossad and American intelligence is going to have to figure out.
Right. Thank you very much, John Rosomondo, for joining us for all the discussions. Now we move on to our next news. Looking at Europe in a powerful show of support for Ukraine, Germany's new Foreign Minister John Wadepool has arrived in Kyiv for high-level talks aimed at strengthening bilateral defense ties amid intensifying Russian attacks. Speaking at a joint press conference with his Ukrainian counterpart, Andriy Sybiha, Wadepool accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of seeking to subjugate the whole of Ukraine and spread fear across Europe, dismissing Moscow's talk of peace as a facade. Germany, already Ukraine's second largest military backer after the United States, announced an additional 2 billion euros in aid for air defense and ammunition. Wadepool also led a delegation of German defense industry executives with plans to establish joint ventures for local weapons production. Both ministers emphasized the urgent need to bolster Ukraine's air shield as Russia steps up its use of drones, missiles, and new battlefield technologies. Sybiha warned that the evolving Russian military threat poses risks not just to Ukraine, but to transatlantic security. Wadepool called defense cooperation with Ukraine a trump card and said both nations stand to benefit from deeper industrial and strategic collaboration. Let's listen in to what the Ukrainian and the German foreign minister had to say.
Вдячний Німеччині за тверду позицію щодо північних потоків. Погоджуємося, що ера залежності від Росії має назавжди залишитися в минулому. Тиск на Росію має бути скоординований з обох боків Атлантики.
Wir haben deshalb bereits vereinbart, die gemeinsame Zusammenarbeit mit der Rüstungsindustrie zu verstärken. Wir wollen neue Joint Ventures aufbauen, damit die Ukraine selbst schneller und mehr für die eigene Verteidigung produzieren kann, denn euer Bedarf ist enorm. Und ich habe deshalb, glaube ich, erstmalig eine Delegation aus der Verteidigungsindustrie der Bundesrepublik Deutschland mit mir mitgebracht, und ich freue mich sehr, dass sie mich begleitet. Unsere Rüstungszusammenarbeit ist ein echter Trumpf.
Now we are joined by guest ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister Glenn Grant. He's joining us live from Riga, Latvia. Thank you, Glenn, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. How does this?
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And how does this visit and new funding package shape Europe's position if Trump returns to the White House and tries to pull back U.S. support?
Well, in the first place, I think Trump already has pulled back US support, although some of it is still going on, but not at the level that we would expect for this stage of the war. I think it's important that the Germans stay close to Ukraine, because a lot of Ukrainians are obviously worried that money is going to go to the Middle East, and that it's not going to come into Ukraine. So there's real human concerns in this area. But also the Germans the German minister is very keen to put the German money into businesses and produce things. Because when it goes to the government, it's not been as effective as it should be. That is the Ukrainian government. And the Germans will have seen that the Danish model, which is actually money direct to Ukrainian companies, or to other European companies to produce things, is producing a much more effective answer.
And Glenn, now we have seen Germany push up or increase their military support to Ukraine. Could this move of Germany's deeper involvement make it more vulnerable to Russian energy blackmail or cyber attacks?
I think it's vulnerable anyway. I mean, they've just had vehicles burnt inside Germany, and there have been attacks on the railways. There have been attacks on weapon sites, on all sorts of things over the last few years. So I don't think their vulnerability is going to increase. But it is important, because Germany is the most powerful country of the Europeans at the moment. I mean, it was Britain before, but Britain has basically run out of everything and exhausted itself. It can just do training. It can't do weapons and things. The Germans have still got capacity, and they've still got money. This visit is showing that they're not running away from this problem. I would add one thing, which is, why do people underestimate the Russians? I mean, it's clear that they're going to keep increasing their capacity to destroy things. But the Europeans and the Americans don't seem to have taken this into account at all. Maybe the Germans will now.
Thank you, Glenn. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Israel has expressed interest in striking peace agreements with Syria and Lebanon. This move comes after a series of regional changes, including the fall of Syria's Bashar al-Assad and a weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar announced that Israel seeks to expand the Abraham Accords, which have already seen Israel normalize relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. Sa'ar emphasized that any future peace agreements would safeguard Israel's security interests, including its control over the strategically important Golan Heights. Meanwhile, U.S. officials are optimistic about the prospect of broader peace talks with U.S. envoy Tom Barak, suggesting that Syria and Lebanon could soon follow suit. Now we are joined by guest Martin Sa-Ereitz. He's an international affairs expert joining us live from Quito, Ecuador. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you, Martin. Is Israel's push for peace deals with Syria and Lebanon, do you think, is it realistic, or does it underestimate the deep distrust and a lot of unresolved territorial disputes between them?
I think it's very realistic that nowadays many of the Arab neighbors of Israel are gonna follow the Abraham Accords. We need to follow up that the new regime of Syria, even though the new president is not a big fan of Israel, is absolutely not as hostile as the Bashar al-Assad regime, and they want to get closer to the US and to the West, and one of the ways that they can get closer is to sign a peace agreement with Israel, even though they're not this is not ideal for Syrians because of the Golan Heights. One of the proposals is to make the Golan Heights a neutral space, and then Syria can join these Abraham Accords, which is fantastic, and I think is really possible and legit.
And now, Martin, looking at the situation with Assad's fall recently and Hezbollah reportedly weakened, could these shifting power dynamics actually open the door for talks further, or do they risk creating a dangerous vacuum that other regional players like Iran might exploit?
I think the first option is the most realistic. This is fantastic news for the Middle East stability and peace. The fall of the regime in Syria, the Iran being weakened, the Ayatollahs having lost a lot of their power, their nuclear weapon and the nuclear facilities being destroyed, and this, we need to remember, Iran has been the sponsor of Hezbollah and a lot of other terror organizations throughout the Middle East. So once Iran is weakened, Hezbollah will no longer be strong to start a fight with Israel, and they know that. Iran knows that. Lebanon knows that, and actually they're losing a lot of support in Lebanon. Lebanese people are actually wanting to change this reality, being held hostage by Hezbollah, which does not represent the majority's views on Israel in Lebanon. And I think Syria right now is closer to the US than its neighbors, than Lebanon or Iran. The actual regime is an opposite, is absolutely in an opposite view from Iran. They want to be closer to the US than to Iran. They're enemies with Iran. So this is great news for the stability of the Middle East. And I think in the next months or years, we're going to see more Arab nations joining this peace agreement like the Abraham Accord.
Thank you, Martin, for joining us today. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich strongly opposed calls for a ceasefire and hostage release agreement, warning it would set a dangerous precedent for Israel. Smotrich argued that negotiating with Hamas, especially in exchange for hostages, would send a message to Israel's enemies that kidnapping Jews is an effective tactic. Smotrich stressed that Israel's recent military successes, including defeating Hezbollah, eliminating Iran's nuclear program, and decimating the Syrian army, had shifted the regional balance in Israel's favor. He described Hamas as a crushed organization, yet still holding the hostage card. Smotrich warned that giving in to hostage demands would endanger every Jewish person worldwide. He called on Prime Minister Netanyahu to avoid any negotiations with what he called murderers and Nazis, and to continue the military campaign to decisively end the threat from Gaza. Now we are going back. Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar and his Australian counterpart BT Main Reisinger in Jerusalem to discuss the ongoing conflict in Gaza. With the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsening, BT Main Reisinger expressed concern over the unbearable suffering of civilians, urging the immediate implementation of a ceasefire. Let's listen to what she has said.
Burdening Israel's relations with Europe. A ceasefire must be agreed upon, yes. Hamas must release all the hostages without preconditions, and humanitarian aid must resume.
Meanwhile, Saar reiterated Israel's position on a ceasefire, confirming that Israel is serious about reaching a deal to end the war, but only if Hamas is disarmed. Let's listen to what he said.
Israel is serious in its will to reach a hostage deal and ceasefire in Gaza. We said yes to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's proposals, time and again. Unfortunately, until this moment, Hamas hadn't. It is now critical for Europe to back the American initiative for a ceasefire and to shatter Hamas illusions. If a temporary ceasefire is reached, according to Witkoff's proposal, it will be easier also to address the humanitarian situation.
The two ministers have discussed the growing burden the conflict is placing on Israel's relations with Europe, with pressure mounting for a diplomatic resolution. The Israeli military has acknowledged that Palestinian civilians were killed and injured by its fire near 8 distribution points in Gaza, but claims the casualty figures provided by Hamas are exaggerated. In a rare admission, the IDF confirmed that artillery shelling near several humanitarian aid sites resulted in 30 to 40 casualties, including multiple deaths, calling the strikes inaccurate and tragic. The military emphasized that these were not intended attacks on civilians, but the result of efforts to prevent crowds from approaching restricted areas outside designated distribution zones. The IDF says it has since stopped using artillery near aid hubs and is taking steps to reduce civilian harm. This includes reorganizing access routes, improving signage, and enhancing coordination around the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites, which are supported by Israel and the United States. While insisting live fire was only used when troops faced threats, the IDF acknowledged that investigations are ongoing into each incident. Now we have guest Martin Sa-Eraitz. He's an international affairs expert joining us live from Quito, Ecuador. Thank you, Martin, for staying with us throughout this discussion. Now, does this Israeli military's rare admission of civilian deaths near 8 points help build a credibility, or does it reinforce critics' claims that its rules of engagement in Gaza remain too loose and too dangerous, and lots of people being killed around these aid sites?
Unfortunately, the war in Gaza is very complicated. We see a lot of factors that give this horrible outcome of civilians being killed as a result of Hamas infiltrating civilian populations. And this is actually the goal of Hamas. They want actually their own people to be killed so they can win the mediatic war against Israel. Israel is still bombarding the infrastructure of Hamas. They're not going out of Gaza unless they're sure Hamas is destroyed and there is infrastructure. The rocket launcher technologies, the tunnels, and all of this infrastructure needs to be destroyed. And it's unfortunate. Israel is actually every time telling civilians in Gaza to leave the places they are trying to eliminate. And these people follow the rules, but sometimes Hamas keep them as hostages. Hamas kill them in order to promote this idea that there's a genocide in Gaza. So this is what is going on. It's very tragic, but it's on Hamas' hands. And hopefully, once they get defeated, the people in Gaza can actually start their lives again. And this is very tragic.
Thank you, Martin. You will stay with us for our next news. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio held high-level talks today with Dr. Muhammad Yunus, Chief Advisor to Bangladesh's interim government. The two leaders reaffirmed their shared commitment to strengthening economic cooperation and enhancing regional security across the Indo-Pacific. The conversation comes as a time of growing strategic importance for Bangladesh as Washington looks to deepen alliances in South Asia amid rising geopolitical tensions in the region. Both sides stressed the importance of stable governance, trade expansion, and maintaining peace and security frameworks in the broader Indo-Pacific. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Martin Sai writes, he's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Martin, for staying with us. According to you, how significant is Bangladesh's role in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy? Is this high-level meeting a sign that Washington sees Dhaka as a new pivot in South Asia's balance of power?
Absolutely. Well, Bangladesh is now facing a lot of inner political complications, especially in human rights, and it's actually a very new thing that they are joining this international panel. But of course, this is gonna pave a new reality for this southwest of Asia, and hopefully international cooperation can help Bangladesh to develop itself, even though there's a lot of humanitarian issues in the country.
Thank you very much, Martin Sai writes, for joining us today and sharing that insight on all our discussions. Now we move on to our next news. China says it remains committed to maintaining dialogue and peace along its disputed border with India. This comes after recent talks between the Chinese and Indian defense ministers amid ongoing tensions in the Himalayan border region. Responding to questions, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said both nations have long established diplomatic and military communication mechanisms in place. She confirmed that a boundary resolution framework already exists and emphasized China's willingness to continue demarcation talks and border management discussions with India. Mao reiterated Beijing's call for cooperation to preserve peace in border areas and strengthening cross-border ties. Now we have guests joining us on this discussion, Andrew K.P. Long. He is China strategist joining us live from Hong Kong. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what's your reaction about China claiming this, and India has yet to officially comment back on Chinese spokesperson's statements?
Both sides do not want to be distracted from other more pressing issues facing each country. India just had a border conflict with Pakistan, and of course facing the threat of U.S. tariffs. China, of course, is also at the forefront of dealing with the tariffs and other states. And border dispute, the so-called so it's been going for decades without any casualties on both sides. So I think the leaders on both sides recently already ordered people to scale down the confrontation, scale down the escalation. And I think that the situation.
Andrew, we might be facing a technical issue here. We cannot hear you clearly. If you can maybe say something again. China says it remains committed to maintaining dialogue with India and for peace along with its disputed border with India. This comes after recent talks between the Chinese and Indian defense ministers amid ongoing tensions in the Himalayan border region. Now we are joined back by Andrew K.P. Long. He's China strategist, just joining us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, can you hear me? Because we couldn't hear you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right.
So
Okay.
since we couldn't hear your answer, I would like to ask the same questions as I asked before.
Yes.
Should I repeat the question here?
No,
Okay.
I know
Okay.
answer
On to you.
questions. I think that both countries are facing a lot of pressing issues. India just had both conflict with Pakistan and also deal with the negotiations with the United States. China likewise, still the negotiations with the United States.
We might be facing some technical problems with Andrew, so we move on to our next news. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us. The Kremlin has responded sharply to comments by U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, who is pushing for sweeping new sanctions on Russia, warning that such moves could undermine efforts to reach a peace settlement in Ukraine. In an interview, Senator Graham revealed that President Donald Trump had endorsed the sanctions bill, which includes imposing 500% tariffs on countries such as China and India that continue to buy Russian oil. Graham described Trump's support as a big breakthrough, saying it would give him leverage to pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin into negotiations. But the Kremlin hit back today, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov calling Graham a Russophobe, saying his stance is well known and suggesting that such aggressive measures could obstruct rather than advance peace efforts. The bill, if passed, would give Trump the option to waive or enforce the sanctions, keeping the final decision in his hands. Kremlin officials say the U.S. should consider whether such actions truly contribute to resolving the Ukraine conflict. Now we go to our next news. The Kremlin has weighed in on the unrest in Serbia, warning that the anti-government protests rocking the country may be part of a color revolution. Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters that while Serbia is under what he called unprecedented pressure, the Kremlin could not rule out the use of familiar tactics aimed at destabilizing governments aligned with Moscow. The remarks come after Serbian police clashed with demonstrators in Belgrade. Over the weekend, protesters are demanding snap elections and an end to President Aleksandar Vučić's 12-year rule. Despite the turmoil, Peskov expressed confidence that the Serbian leadership would restore calm, calling Serbia a close ally and citing Vučić's recent visit to Moscow for Russia's Victory Day parade. President Vučić has claimed that foreign powers were behind the protests, accusing demonstrators of trying to topple Serbia. Now we move on to our next news. A major global development summit has opened in Seville, Spain, with more than 4,000 delegates and dozens of world leaders in attendance, but notably absent is the United States, signaling growing fragmentation in international cooperation on aid, climate, and poverty reduction. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sounded the alarm, telling delegates that 2/3 of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are currently off track. He warned that over $4 trillion in yearly investment is needed to meet those targets, including tackling hunger, poverty, climate change. Here's what he had to say.
Mundo sacudido por desigualdades, caos climático y conflictos devastadores. El vínculo entre paz y desarrollo es evidente. 9 de los 10 países con los indicadores de desarrollo humano más bajos se encuentran actualmente en situación de conflicto. Excelencias, la financiación es el motor del desarrollo y ahora mismo ese motor se está ahogando.
Among the attendees are leaders from Kenya, Senegal, Angola, Sudan, and Ecuador, highlighting strong Global South representation, while President Trump's administration continues to scale back development funding and gut USAID, America's main aid agency. Guterres said the growing funding crisis means children are going without vaccines, girls are leaving school, and families are going hungry, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where extreme poverty is on the rise. He urged the global community to change course and invest in a fairer, greener future. Meanwhile, EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said that the European Union's commitment is here to stay on international aid, tells a conference in Seville. Here's what she had to say.
We quite simply need a change of paradigm, new ways of mobilizing much more finance. This is a core of the Compromiso de Sevilla that we agreed today. The European Union provides 42% of the world's development aid. We're proud of this, and our commitment is here to stay. At the same time, it is good that new donors are now stepping up. So why don't we combine forces, set up joint investment programs that play on our respective strengths for maximum impact?
Now we have a breaking news. In Gaza, tragedy has struck again as Nasser Hospital confirmed receiving the bodies of 11 Palestinians shot dead while returning from an aid site linked to the Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Fund. The fatal incident occurred just 3 kilometers from the GHF distribution hub in Khan Yunis, part of a deadly pattern in recent weeks that's claimed over 500 lives during aid runs. In the north, 10 more were killed at a UN aid warehouse with few routes and desperate need. Palestinians are risking their lives simply to access humanitarian relief. Now we move on to our next news. Firefighters in Turkey are battling intense wildfires in the western province of Izmir. As strong winds continue to fan the flames, Forestry Minister Ibrahim Yumakli confirmed that wildfires in the Kuyucak and Doğan Bey areas forced the evacuation of 4 villages and 2 neighborhoods overnight, with wind gusts reaching up to 50 kilometers per hour. More than 1,000 personnel, along with helicopters, firefighting aircraft, and water-laden tractors, are on the ground battling the blaze. Turkey's disaster agency AFAD says over 50,000 people have now been evacuated, with the hardest hit area being Şeferi Hisar, a forested coastal zone southwest of Izmir. Experts warn that climate change is making Turkey's summers hotter and drier, increasing the frequency and intensity of wildfires across the country's coastal regions. Let's listen in.
Birçok canlılar var. Kuşlar var, böcekler var, diğer hayvanlar var. Maalesef şu anda onların bu 12 kilometrelik bir hattan bahsediyoruz. Uzunluk itibariyle 5 kilometrelik bir genişlikten bahsediyoruz yer yer. Burada etkilenen canlılar. Şu ana kadar yangınlardan etkilendiğini söyleyen 21 vatandaşımız işte dumandan ya da farklı sebeplerle bunların tamamı ayakta tedaviyle evlerine geri dönmüş durumda. Yani hayati bir tehlikesi yok.
Now we move on to our next news. Southern Europe continues to endure a punishing heat wave, with record-breaking temperatures reaching as high as 46 degrees in parts of Spain and Portugal. The heat has sparked health and wildfire warnings as authorities in several Mediterranean countries urge people to stay indoors and protect vulnerable groups. France placed 84 departments on high alert, while firefighters across the region remain on standby as wildfires rage in France, Turkey, and Italy. In Spain and Portugal, the extreme temperatures have already shattered June records. In Italy, red alerts are in effect for 18 cities, and in Britain, the heat has led to warnings across 7 regions. Coinciding with the start of Wimbledon tennis tournament, experts warn that heat waves like these are becoming more frequent and intense due to climate change, with little relief in sight. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.